Your tickets aren't valid. This flight is full. You people always cause trouble. The words sharp and dismissive pierced through the air like a slap. The bustling terminal suddenly hushed. A black father stood frozen, clutching his daughter's tiny hand, while his wife stared at the airline employee in disbelief. Around them, a line of travelers shifted uneasily, some watching with interest, others with their phones subtly recording. Darius Mitchell was not new to airports. As a senior software engineer based in Atlanta, he had flown for work and leisure countless times. But this day was different. This Flight 218 to Seattle was meant to be their first real family vacation since the pandemic. He, his wife Lauren, and their 6-year-old daughter Nia were finally heading to explore the Pacific Northwest. They had checked in on time. Their bags were tagged. Their boarding passes were digital and confirmed. Everything had gone smoothly until now. The woman blocking them wore a navy blue blazer with polished gold buttons, a name badge clipped precisely to her chest. Elaine, senior crew. She didn't look at their tickets. She didn't scan anything. She just stood there with her arms folded and lips tight as though daring them to challenge her. "We have seats 12A, 12B, and 12C, Darius said calmly, holding up his phone. Elaine rolled her eyes. "I said the flight is full. I'm not arguing with you. You can either step aside or be escorted out." Nia, standing quietly beside her father, clutched her unicorn backpack and looked up at the woman, confused. "Daddy, are we not going on vacation?" Lauren knelt beside her daughter, brushing a curl from her face. "It's okay, baby. We're just sorting something out." Darius took a deep breath. "Ma'am, respectfully, we've paid for these tickets months ago. I'm sure there's a way to check." "I don't need to check," Elaine cut him off. "I've already let enough people through. And frankly, I'm tired of the drama. You people always want special treatment." There it was again, you people. The phrase hung heavy in the air. A couple in line behind them audibly gasped. A middle-aged white man holding a neck pillow muttered, "That's not okay." But no one stepped forward. Lauren stood up, her voice shaking but steady. "We're not looking for special treatment. We're simply asking for what we've rightfully paid for." Elaine turned to the gate agent seated nearby. "Tina, call security, please." Darius's jaw clenched. Not here, not now, not in front of Nia. He'd read too many stories, black men arrested in airports, tased for raising their voices, vilified for defending their families. This wasn't just about a flight. It was about dignity, safety, and reputation. He stepped aside and pulled out his phone. "Oh, here we go," Elaine said mockingly. "Calling your lawyer." Darius didn't answer. He scrolled to his contacts and tapped one name. It was labeled only Uncle C. The phone rang once, then twice. Then a deep, firm voice answered, "Darius, everything okay?" Darius turned slightly away from the crowd and spoke softly. "Uncle Charles, I need a favor. We're being denied boarding. No reason. At gate 42, Sky Vista Airlines." There was a pause, then a single reply, "Stay where you are. Don't move." 15 minutes passed. During that time, Elaine continued boarding others. She ignored the stares, the whispers. She even sneered at another couple of color walking by. Tina, the gate agent, looked increasingly nervous, but said nothing. Security hadn't arrived yet. Darius stayed calm, standing quietly with his family off to the side. Nia played with her stuffed giraffe. Lauren scrolled through emails, her lips tight. Then something shifted. Two sharply dressed individuals appeared, one in a gray suit with an airport badge, another in a black blazer with a Sky Vista pin. They spoke directly to Elaine, who immediately straightened her posture. Her confident expression faltered. Within moments, a third man walked into view. Tall, charismatic, salt and pepper hair, a presence that commanded attention. He looked directly at Darius and smiled. Charles Barrett, chairman of Sky Vista Airlines, strode forward and embraced Darius like a nephew. "I'm so sorry this happened, son." Elaine's face drained of color. The passengers nearby stared in disbelief. Charles turned to Lauren. "Mrs. Mitchell, Nia, welcome. You'll be boarding first. And don't worry, the flight won't leave until you're seated." Then he faced Elaine, in front of everyone. Loud and clear, "You're relieved from duty, immediately." Elaine opened her mouth to speak, but Charles raised a hand. "Save it. There's a protocol, and you just violated all of it with witnesses and video." Security, now arriving late, approached and took position nearby. Charles handed them a clipboard. "Escort her out quietly." Passengers erupted in whispers. Some applauded. Others just watched with stunned eyes as Elaine was led away. Her expression blank, her career very likely over. As Darius, Lauren, and Nia boarded first as promised, Charles whispered, "You stood your ground. Proud of you." Elaine tapped her fingers impatiently against the counter. She hated these moments. Entitled passengers who thought the world owed them something. She'd dealt with enough of them in her 20-year career. But something about the way Darius Mitchell had stepped aside without arguing, that calm, controlled move, unsettled her. She glanced sideways. The Black family was still standing near gate 42. The wife knelt again to speak softly to the little girl, who now looked visibly tired. The man Darius was still on his phone, but no longer talking. He stood tall, composed, and watching. Elaine narrowed her eyes. "They're just bluffing," she muttered. Tina, the younger gate agent sitting behind the terminal screen, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Elaine, maybe we should double-check their booking," she suggested timidly. "I already told you, Tina. Don't override me. I've been here longer than you've had a job. Don't let them manipulate you with drama." Tina didn't answer. She glanced at the family again and quietly typed something into her system. Her eyes widened. Row 12 confirmed. All 3 seats. Paid in full. No issues on file. In fact, there was a note in the system marked "Priority Customer Flag." Tina opened her mouth, hesitated, then closed it again. She'd seen Elaine shut down colleagues for less. Behind them, murmurs were starting. The crowd near gate 42 had grown. A few passengers had their phones up, recording not just the family, but Elaine herself. Social media was always hungry for moments like these. Then it happened. A man in a tailored gray suit, clean-shaven, wearing a Sky Vista executive badge, walked briskly toward the gate. He was followed by a woman in heels and a blazer holding a clipboard. They looked official, important, and they were not smiling. Elaine straightened up and adjusted her scarf. "Excuse me," the man said, his tone firm. "Senior crew Elaine." "Yes," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. He handed her a sealed envelope and said quietly, "We need you to step away from the desk, immediately." Elaine blinked. "What's going on?" But before she could finish, a third figure arrived. Tall, poised, silver hair and dark skin, sharp eyes. He wasn't wearing a Sky Vista badge, but the woman with the clipboard stepped aside for him with clear deference. The man walked directly toward the family. He reached out and shook Darius's hand with a warm familiarity, then bent slightly to greet the little girl. "Nia? Right, I hear you're heading to Seattle to see the aquarium. I hope they have your favorite sea turtles ready." Lauren looked at the man, stunned. "How do you—" Darius smiled slightly. "Lauren, meet Uncle Charles, or more formally, Charles Barrett." Elaine, now watching the interaction from a few feet away, turned pale. Charles Barrett, chairman of the board, Sky Vista Airlines, the man who shaped policy, who set company culture, who fired CEOs. He turned to face Elaine. "You refused boarding to this family?" he asked, voice cool but edged with steel. Elaine straightened up. "They didn't have valid." "Save it," he said, cutting her off. "I've already reviewed the boarding logs. Tina's override was recorded, and your body cam footage is being pulled right now." Elaine stammered. "Sir, I didn't know who they were." "That's the problem," Charles said slowly. "You only see value when you recognize status, not humanity." There was no yelling, no threats, just disappointment, and that stung more than anger. Behind them, the crowd began whispering. Phones were still recording. "Escort her out," Charles instructed one of the security guards. "She's relieved of duty pending investigation. The flight will not take off until this matter is resolved." Elaine tried to protest, but security gently but firmly guided her away. Darius looked down at his daughter. "Ready to board, sweetheart?" Nia nodded, holding his hand tightly. Charles turned to Lauren. "Please accept my apology. We've already rebooked you in first class, and the captain has been instructed to wait for you personally." Lauren's eyes filled with tears, not just because of the inconvenience, but because someone had finally stood up and acted. Publicly, immediately. Charles looked around at the stunned passengers. "Let this be clear," he said, not just to them, but to the watching phones. "At Sky Vista, we don't tolerate disrespect, discrimination, or gatekeeping based on ignorance. Everyone deserves dignity. Period." As they boarded, the family received warm smiles and nods. Several passengers clapped softly. Tina gave a small wave and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Nia looked up at her dad. "Daddy, is Uncle Charles the boss of the plane?" Darius chuckled. "Sort of, baby. He's the boss of the whole airline." Lauren leaned in. "I think you just saved more than just this flight, Charles." He replied simply, "Sometimes it takes one moment to remind the system what it's supposed to stand for." The flight to Seattle was already 10 minutes behind schedule, and the captain had received an unusual delay notice. "Wait for 3 passengers. Special authorization pending. Do not close doors." Inside the jet bridge, the air had grown still. Darius, Lauren, and little Nia stood just a few steps from the plane's entrance. Behind them, Charles Barrett stood tall like a guardian, his presence commanding even in silence. A young flight attendant at the aircraft door looked confused when she saw Charles. She whispered to her colleague, "Is that the chairman?" Before she could finish, Charles turned to Darius and bent slightly to speak to Nia. "You've got the most important job on this plane," he told her with a wink. Nia tilted her head. "What job?" "You're the first official Sea Turtle Scout to board Flight 218. And I hear there's a special seat where you can spot whales from the window." Her face lit up. She looked to her parents, who both smiled. Lauren whispered, "We didn't expect all this." Charles replied, "You didn't ask for this. You deserved it. You deserved to be treated fairly from the start." They stepped into the plane. As they made their way down the aisle, whispers spread. Some passengers clapped softly. Others nodded respectfully. One older woman with gray hair touched Lauren's arm and said, "I'm so sorry for what happened out there." A businessman leaned over and told Darius it was wrong. "I'm glad someone stood up." They reached their new seats first class, just as Charles had promised. A kind flight attendant offered Nia a coloring book and a snack box. Another brought champagne for Darius and Lauren. Charles didn't follow them onto the plane. He stood at the door watching until they were seated. Then, without fanfare, he stepped back, nodded to the captain, and gave one final instruction. "Now you may take off." Meanwhile, Elaine sat in a small room near the operations office, her blazer draped over her lap, hands clasped tightly. No one had spoken to her in 10 minutes. She watched a muted security monitor replay the footage of the terminal from earlier. The image showed her face cold and dismissive as she pointed and blocked the Mitchell family. It showed Tina glancing nervously. It showed other passengers watching, recording. And then it showed Charles Barrett arriving and everything changing in an instant. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, to explain that she hadn't meant it like that she was under pressure, that she didn't recognize them. But none of those things mattered anymore. She hadn't needed to recognize them. She just needed to be decent. Back on the plane, Darius gazed out the window as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. He exhaled slowly, shoulders finally beginning to drop. Lauren reached over and squeezed his hand. "I still can't believe he came." "I didn't think he would show up in person," Darius said. "I just called to ask if he had any contacts at corporate. I didn't expect—" He trailed off. Nia was already curled into her window seat, munching crackers and coloring a sea turtle. "She'll remember this for a long time," Lauren whispered. "So will I," Darius replied. "But not because of the drama. Because of how quickly one man did the right thing, without cameras, without politics." Lauren smiled softly. "That's what power looks like when it's used to protect, not control." A few rows back, one of the economy passengers, an older black man with salt and pepper hair, watched the Mitchells with quiet pride. He turned to his wife and said, "Maybe the world is finally changing." She nodded. "Maybe, but it still takes someone brave to start it." He replied, "That young man, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He made one call and let the truth do the rest." They both sat back as the plane took off, carried by jet engines and a little more justice than usual. As Flight 218 cruised through the clouds at 36,000 feet peace, returned to the cabin. Nia had fallen asleep, curled up with her purple hoodie acting as a pillow against the window, her small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Lauren gently covered her daughter with a blanket, brushing a soft kiss onto her forehead. Darius sat back, the hum of the engines oddly calming now. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to exhale fully, not just physically, but emotionally. His phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. A message from Charles. "Let me know when you land. I'll be waiting." Not if, but when. It was a small thing. But after everything that had happened, it mattered. Lauren leaned over. "Do you think there will be fallout?" Darius nodded. "Oh, there already is. Videos are probably viral by now. Charles made sure justice was public. But I don't think he did it for the cameras." No, Lauren set her eyes on the sleeping child next to her. "He did it for her." She looked at Nia again. "So that when she's old enough to remember today, she remembers the right part." In row 14, back in Coach Tina, the gate agent had been upgraded to a passenger seat by Charles as a quiet thank you. She stared out the window with a strange mix of guilt and gratitude swimming in her chest. She hadn't spoken up earlier, but she'd entered the override code. She'd documented everything. And maybe that helped. The man beside her turned slightly and said, "You were at the gate, weren't you?" Tina looked at him warily. "I saw you," he said kindly. I saw your face when that woman turned them away. You knew it was wrong. Tina blinked surprised. I just did my job. I wish I had done more. The man offered a half smile. Sometimes doing the right thing quietly is just as loud as shouting. But next time, I'll speak louder, Tina said before he could finish. He nodded. Good. Meanwhile, back at the Sky Vista corporate office, a wave of calls, tweets, and media alerts had already hit the PR team. But surprisingly, the tone was not rage. It was praise. A tweet had gone viral. Flight attendant tried to block a black family with valid tickets. CEO's godson was the dad. Within 20 minutes, the chairman himself showed up and shut it down. This is leadership. Other messages poured in. Faith in airlines partially restored today. Sky Vista just set the bar on how to deal with racism in real time. Shout out to Charles Barrett for not just talking about DEI but living it. The CEO of Sky Vista had already sent Charles a message. You made us proud today. Let's meet Monday. HR wants your input on training reform. Charles simply replied, let's make sure this never happens again, not just for my godson, for every passenger. As the wheels of the plane touched down in Seattle, passengers began to stir. Some opened shades. Others packed away books and devices. But there was a collective energy in the cabin, subtle but palpable. Darius looked out at the sunlit tarmac, then at his wife and daughter. He felt something he hadn't felt all day: relief. Not just because of the successful flight, but because the story had changed. This time the headlines would not be about a man yelling, being dragged off a plane, or a child crying as her parents were mistreated. This time the story was about what happens when dignity wins. As the family stepped off the plane, the captain stood at the cockpit door. Mr. Mitchell, he said, offering a respectful nod. Heard what happened. On behalf of my crew, thank you for your grace under pressure. Darius shook his hand. Thank you for flying us home. Outside the gate, standing tall in the terminal, was Charles Barrett. No cameras, no assistants. Just a quiet, calm man in a suit with eyes that watch for the people who matter. As Nia ran into his arms squealing Uncle Charles, he scooped her up with a big grin. I told the sea turtles you were coming, he whispered. Lauren hugged him next, then Darius. You didn't have to come, Darius said softly. Yes, Charles replied, holding Darius's shoulder. I did, because how the world treats you today shapes how she sees herself tomorrow. Darius looked at his daughter in Charles's arms, and he understood. The hotel suite was quiet, but Darius couldn't sleep. It had been hours since they landed in Seattle, since Charles had hugged Nia goodbye and slipped quietly back into his black car outside SeaTac Airport. But the weight of the day, the confrontation, the humiliation, the unexpected redemption still lingered like a second skin on Darius's shoulders. Lauren was in the bathroom brushing her teeth. Nia was fast asleep in the smaller room next door, her unicorn plushie tucked under her arm like it was guarding her dreams. Darius sat at the edge of the bed holding his phone. Messages had been pouring in. Old college friends, co-workers, even his boss from the firm back in Atlanta had texted. Is that you in the video going viral? Incredible grace under pressure, man. He hadn't even seen the video yet. Someone in the terminal had clearly posted footage of the incident at Gate 42, and now it had been viewed over 2.3 million times. He tapped it open. The thumbnail alone made his stomach twist, Elaine pointing at them. Darius holding Nia's hand, the hurt on Lauren's face frozen in time. The video played. He heard it all again. The condescension. The phrase, you people. Lauren's quiet voice trying to reason. Nia's small voice asking if they couldn't go on vacation. His own silence as he dialed Charles. And then, the moment Charles Barrett arrived. The shift. The justice. The comments below were a mix of outrage, support, and awe. This man is a hero. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He just stood tall. Props to the airline chairman. This is how you lead. My dad cried watching this. He's never seen a black man treated fairly like this at an airport. Lauren stepped out and noticed the light from the phone. Still watching. He looked up and nodded. Yeah, the video blew up. She sat beside him and leaned her head on his shoulder. We didn't ask for any of this. No, he replied. But maybe it found us for a reason. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Atlanta, Charles Barrett sat alone in his home study, a mug of cold tea untouched beside his laptop. He was reviewing internal reports, gate staff interviews, security camera logs, even employee training guidelines. He wasn't angry anymore. He was motivated. Charles had spent years pushing DEI policies from the boardroom. He had sat through presentations, signed pledges, funded workshops. But what happened at Gate 42 had reminded him that real change never starts on paper. It starts at the gate. He opened a blank document and began typing. Sky Vista Employee Culture and Conduct Overhaul, Draft 1. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. Media wants a statement. Do you want PR to handle it? He typed back. No, I'll write it myself. They need to hear it from a black father, not just a chairman. Back at the hotel, Darius finally crawled into bed. Lauren was already half asleep when she whispered, "What are you going to say if reporters reach out?" He stared at the ceiling. The truth, that I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to get on a plane with my family. But now people are watching, she said. Maybe you can say something they've never heard before. He turned to face her, eyes steady. Then I'll make sure it's worth listening to. The next morning began with a knock. It wasn't room service. It wasn't housekeeping. It was a quiet, courteous tap 3 times. Then silence. Lauren stirred first. Darius, still in a t-shirt and sweatpants, rubbed his eyes and approached the door. When he opened it, a young black man in a gray blazer stood holding a lanyard with the Sky Vista logo and a calm smile. "Mr. Mitchell," he asked. "Yes. I'm Devin Rooks, Media Relations Liaison for Sky Vista. Mr. Barrett asked me to personally reach out. He didn't want to disturb your family, but there's a request I think you should hear." Darius's brow furrowed. A request. Devin stepped in slightly and handed him a sleek black tablet. On the screen was a message draft from Charles Barrett himself addressed to all Sky Vista passengers. "Yesterday, something happened at Gate 42 that should never happen anywhere, especially under our name. A family was denied dignity, and that family just so happened to be mine. But even if they weren't, my response would be the same." The rest of the message was powerful, personal, and uncompromising. It was already being prepared for distribution to the airline's newsletter, social platforms, and even national press. But at the bottom there was a highlighted section. "Would you allow us to include a quote from you, Darius L., message from a father, not just a passenger. We want the world to hear from the heart of this story, not just the headline." Lauren had walked over and was now reading alongside him. She looked up. "Are you ready for that?" Darius didn't answer immediately. He looked over at Nia, who had just wandered out of the bedroom, still rubbing sleep from her eyes and dragging her unicorn plush by one arm. She blinked up at them. "Are we going to the museum today?" Lauren smiled. "Yes, baby, later today." Darius crouched down beside her. "Nia, do you remember what happened yesterday? With the lady who said we couldn't go on the plane?" She nodded slowly. "Did it make you feel bad?" Nia looked down, then whispered, "I thought maybe we weren't allowed." Darius felt something twist in his chest. He looked up at Devin and said, "Give me 10 minutes. I'll write something now." Back at Sky Vista headquarters, Charles Barrett read the email on his private screen. It was short, powerful, from Darius. "All I ever wanted was to take my daughter on a family trip. But yesterday we were made to feel like we didn't belong, until someone reminded us and everyone watching that we did. Dignity isn't a premium service. It's a human right." Charles let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Then he clicked approve. By noon, the message had gone live. It was picked up by major outlets. CNN posted the full letter from Charles Barrett. The New York Times added an op-ed titled "A Seat at the Gate, What the Mitchell Family Taught Us About Respect." Twitter exploded with hashtags Marsha's Gate 42 Justice, Marsha Flying While Black, and Sky Vista Speaks. At a small brunch spot near Pike Place Market, the Mitchells tried to blend in with the crowd, but a waitress recognized them halfway through their pancakes. "You're that family, right?" she asked softly, from the airport. Darius smiled, unsure how to respond. The waitress leaned in. "I just wanted to say thank you for keeping your calm, for making people listen. My nephew's biracial, and he watched that video like it was a Marvel movie. Said you were the real superhero." Lauren wiped a sudden tear from her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. Elsewhere in cities across the country, airline staff were gathering in mandatory meetings as Sky Vista released a new policy initiative called the 42 Standard, a direct nod to Gate 42. It wasn't just a PR gesture. It included bias response training, an anonymous passenger hotline, and a rotating panel of passengers from diverse backgrounds who would review real gate scenarios and give feedback. Elaine, now suspended and under review, watched all this unfold from her apartment couch. Her phone had been ringing nonstop with reporters, with trolls, and with people she used to consider friends. But most of all, she was haunted by one truth. She didn't lose her job because of the Mitchells. She lost it because of how she saw them. The next morning began with a knock. It wasn't room service, it wasn't housekeeping. It was a quiet, courteous tap 3 times. Then silence. Lauren stirred first. Darius, still in a t-shirt and sweatpants, rubbed his eyes and approached the door. When he opened it, a young black man in a gray blazer stood holding a lanyard with the Sky Vista logo and a calm smile. "Mr. Mitchell," he asked. "Yes, I'm Devin Rooks, Media Relations Liaison for Sky Vista. Mr. Barrett asked me to personally reach out. He didn't want to disturb your family, but there's a request I think you should hear." Darius's brow furrowed. A request. Devin stepped in slightly and handed him a sleek black tablet. On the screen was a message draft from Charles Barrett himself addressed to all Sky Vista passengers. "Yesterday, something happened at Gate 42 that should never happen anywhere, especially under our name. A family was denied dignity, and that family just so happened to be mine. But even if they weren't, my response would be the same." The rest of the message was powerful, personal, and uncompromising. It was already being prepared for distribution to the airline's newsletter, social platforms, and even national press. But at the bottom there was a highlighted section. "Would you allow us to include a quote from you, Darius, a message from a father, not just a passenger? We want the world to hear from the heart of this story, not just the headline." Lauren had walked over and was now reading alongside him. She looked up. "Are you ready for that?" Darius didn't answer immediately. He looked over at Nia, who had just wandered out of the bedroom, still rubbing sleep from her eyes and dragging her unicorn plush by one arm. She blinked up at them. "Are we going to the museum today?" Lauren smiled. "Yes, baby, later today." Darius crouched down beside her. "Nia, do you remember what happened yesterday? With the lady who said we couldn't go on the plane?" She nodded slowly. "Did it make you feel bad?" Nia looked down, then whispered, "I thought maybe we weren't allowed." Darius felt something twist in his chest. He looked up at Devin and said, "Give me 10 minutes. I'll write something now." Back at Sky Vista headquarters, Charles Barrett read the email on his private screen. It was short, powerful, from Darius. "All I ever wanted was to take my daughter on a family trip. But yesterday we were made to feel like we didn't belong. Until someone reminded us and everyone watching that we did. Dignity isn't a premium service. It's a human right." Charles let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Then he clicked approve. By noon, the message had gone live. It was picked up by major outlets. CNN posted the full letter from Charles Barrett. The New York Times added an op-ed titled, "A Seat at the Gate, What the Mitchell Family Taught Us About Respect." Twitter exploded with hashtags Gate 42 Justice, She Flying While Black, and Sky Vista Speaks. At a small brunch spot near Pike Place Market, the Mitchells tried to blend in with the crowd. But a waitress recognized them halfway through their pancakes. "You're that family, right?" she asked softly. From the airport. Darius smiled, unsure how to respond. The waitress leaned in. "I just wanted to say thank you. For keeping your calm, for making people listen. My nephew's biracial, and he watched that video like it was a Marvel movie. Said you were the real superhero." Lauren wiped a sudden tear from her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. Elsewhere in cities across the country, airline staff were gathering in mandatory meetings as Sky Vista released a new policy initiative called the 42 Standard, a direct nod to Gate 42. It wasn't just a PR gesture. It included Monsieur bias response training, an anonymous passenger hotline, and a rotating panel of passengers from diverse backgrounds who would review real gate scenarios and give feedback. Elaine, now suspended and under review, watched all this unfold from her apartment couch. Her phone had been ringing nonstop with reporters, with trolls, and with people she used to consider friends. But most of all, she was haunted by one truth. She didn't lose her job because of the Mitchells. She lost it because of how she saw them. That night back at the hotel, Darius opened his inbox and saw hundreds of messages. But one stood out. Subject: thank you from a stranger from Sharon.altmanskivista.com. "Hi, Mr. Mitchell. You don't know me, but I was 4 people behind you in line that day. I wanted to speak up. I didn't. I just watched. But today I printed out your quote and posted it in our staff room. You may have boarded that plane alone, but now the rest of us are following. Thank you. Sharon Altman, Sky Vista Crew, Denver." Darius turned the screen to Lauren. She read it in silence. Then she nodded. "Good, let them follow." The afternoon in Seattle was unusually warm sunlight pouring down on the waterfront, like it was trying to melt away what had happened the day before. Darius stood silently at the edge of a long boardwalk, watching the ferries roll across the bay. His daughter Nia ran ahead with her plush turtle clutched under one arm, skipping across planks, chasing seagulls and laughter. Lauren sat on a nearby bench, sipping a smoothie and responding to texts from her colleagues back home. The world had shifted, but the world also hadn't. Because even now, even after justice was served, something lingered inside Darius, a weight he couldn't quite name. It wasn't bitterness, it wasn't fear, it was something quieter, more dangerous. Doubt, not in himself, but in the spaces he moved through every day. The idea that someone somewhere could still look at a man like him, presentable, respectful, educated, accomplished, and still see a problem. He pulled his phone from his pocket and scrolled. The headlines had started changing tone. Yesterday it was, Black family denied boarding by airline staff. Today it was, father's calm response sparks airline overhaul. Tomorrow, who knew? He clicked open his email. More messages. One from a former client. Hey Darius, I had no idea this happened to you. If you're ever open to speaking about this at our DEI summit, we'd be honored. Paid opportunity, of course. Another from a news anchor. Would you consider appearing live on air? Viewers want to hear your voice. Think about it, a father, a leader, a calm force. Then another one. This one from the White House Office of Public Engagement. His hands froze. We're hosting a panel next month on systemic bias in transportation and customer service industries. Mr. Barrett has recommended you personally as someone who can speak from lived experience with clarity and composure. Please let us know if you consider joining us on stage in DC. Darius lowered the phone. Suddenly, the boardwalk beneath him felt like it had turned into a spotlight. Not because he wasn't proud, but because none of this was what he set out to do. He just wanted to fly with his family, to protect his daughter, to avoid the kind of story that people click but never carry in their hearts. Lauren walked up behind him, gently slipping her hand into his. What's wrong? She asked, her voice soft. He hesitated. They want me to speak in D.C. Her eyebrows lifted. That's huge. He looked at her, searching her expression. But am I the right person? I didn't do anything heroic. She stepped closer. You didn't shout. You didn't push. You didn't humiliate. You made one call, and that call stopped a plane. She gestured toward Nia, now sitting on the boardwalk drawing with chalk. And she's never going to forget that her dad stood tall when she needed it most. He looked down. Let the words settle. Lauren smiled. You weren't trying to become a symbol, Darius. But maybe you're the kind we need. At that same moment, in a modest two-story home in Tallahassee, Florida, a 15-year-old girl named Jada closed her laptop and sat in stunned silence. She'd just watched the Gate 42 video for the 5th time. Her own father had been denied boarding last year because he wore a hoodie and looked agitated. She remembered how he came home red-eyed and quiet, how he threw his backpack in the closet and said, let it go. But now this man Darius, he hadn't let it go. Jada opened a blank document. She titled it, How My Skin Affects My Seat. She began typing. In a break room at JFK Airport, Sharon Altman stared at her phone screen. The email from Darius had been reposted on the airline's internal dashboard with his consent. A few of her co-workers were chatting about it near the coffee machine. Some rolled their eyes, others nodded quietly. She stood up, cleared her throat, and said, this isn't a moment, it's a mirror. And if you flinch, that's probably your reflection. Silence, then one of the newer hires clapped slowly, then another. Maybe it was working. That night, back in their hotel, Nia asked a question that stopped both her parents cold. Daddy, why didn't that lady like us? Lauren looked to Darius. He crouched beside their daughter and thought for a long moment before answering. Sometimes, he said gently, people forget to see with their hearts. They only look with fear. And when people are afraid, they make unfair choices. Nia tilted her head. But I'm nice. You are, he said, smiling. And someday people like you will help fix that. She nodded, then whispered, next time I'll speak up. Lauren reached over and hugged her tightly. Next time, she said, we all will. At 38,000 feet somewhere over the Rockies, flight attendant, Carla Jennings, folded her hands behind her back and stood motionless at the front of the aircraft. The in-flight service was complete, the cabin lights dimmed, and most passengers had sunk into movies or naps. But Carla's mind was nowhere near this flight. It was in Seattle. It was at Gate 42, and it was on her phone screen for the past 48 hours. She had watched the now viral video more times than she could count. The moment that woman Elaine blocked the Mitchell family, the expression on the father's face, the little girl's voice asking, are we not going on vacation? Carla had been a flight attendant for 16 years. She'd seen a lot drunk passengers missed connections, racial bias whispered behind pursed smiles, but never something so blatant, so chilling. And what shook her the most was not just Elaine's words, it was her own silence. Because she had worked with Elaine before, she remembered little red flags, a snide comment about a family with too many kids, An eye roll when a passenger asked for a second snack. She had noticed and said nothing. Now her own silence felt like a stain she couldn't scrub. At the back of the plane, Carla sat across from her crew partner in the galley. "You okay?" asked a young attendant named Marco, popping open a ginger ale. Carla hesitated, then pulled out her phone and opened a picture of the Mitchells, a screenshot of the family boarding first class, with passengers smiling as they passed. "You know them?" Marco asked. "No," she said quietly, "but I should have." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked him dead in the eye. "I mean, I've seen that happen before. Not exactly like that, but enough. And I never reported it. Not once." Marco didn't speak. Carla went on. "I kept telling myself it wasn't my place, that it wasn't that bad, that maybe the passenger was being difficult. But now I realize." She swallowed. "It's not about being bad. It's about being silent." Back in Atlanta, Charles Barrett received a call from Carla herself that evening. She didn't go through protocol. She didn't wait for legal review. She called his office directly. His assistant tried to redirect her, but Carla insisted. When Charles answered, her voice shook. "Mr. Barrett, my name is Carla Jennings. I've been with Sky Vista for 16 years. I was not at Gate 42, but I've worked with Elaine. I've seen similar things, and I didn't say anything." Charles was quiet. He let her speak. "I don't want to be complicit anymore," she said. "I want to be useful. If you're building anything new, I want in. Training, outreach, accountability, anything. I want to help clean the house I've been living in." He replied with a single word, "Good." Meanwhile, in a classroom in Minneapolis, a teacher named Mrs. Davenport paused a current events lesson and played the Gate 42 video on the projector. A dozen fifth graders watched in silence. When it ended, she asked, "What would you have done if you were there?" One boy raised his hand. "I'd tell the flight lady she's wrong." A girl said, "I'd go get help." Then a quiet student in the corner, Mateo, spoke up. "I think I'd stand by them, even if I couldn't do anything, just so they don't feel alone." The class went silent. Mrs. Davenport smiled. "That might be the bravest answer of all." Back in Seattle, Darius sat at a small desk in the hotel lobby, laptop, open, cursor blinking. He'd been invited to speak on an airline industry panel. It was going to be live streamed. There would be CEOs, reporters, activists. He was writing his opening, but the words wouldn't come. Until Lauren walked over and placed a folded note in front of him. It was in crayon, written by Nia. "Dear people who fly the planes, please remember that brown kids are excited too. We just want to see turtles and be happy. That's all. Love, Nia." Darius stared at the note for a long time. Then he closed the laptop and started writing from the heart. The ballroom was filled with soft conversation and cautious anticipation. Rows of white chairs lined the hotel conference room in Washington, D.C., facing a broad stage with a blue backdrop that read, "Equity in Action Building Trust in Public Spaces." There were mayors, transportation officials, airline executives, journalists, and in the front row sat Charles Barrett, arms folded calmly, eyes steady. Next to him sat Lauren, wearing a navy dress and a silent strength that carried more weight than most of the speeches in the room. Nia sat between them, her sea turtle plush tucked into her lap like a badge of courage. She was coloring a page someone had given her, backstage, a picture of a plane and clouds. Then the announcer spoke. "And now please welcome to the stage, Mr. Darius Mitchell." There was polite applause. Darius stepped out in a gray blazer, his posture upright but not stiff. He didn't bring notes. Just a folded piece of paper in his pocket, the one with Nia's crayon message, "Brown kids are excited too." He approached the microphone, paused, and looked out across the audience. For a brief moment, he didn't see officials or cameras. He saw faces, tired ones, curious ones, some bracing for discomfort. He began. "I never meant to be here," he said simply, "and I certainly never meant to go viral." A few chuckles, a few nods. "I'm a father, a husband, a guy who just wanted to take his family to Seattle to see the ocean and some turtles. That's it." He paused again. But somewhere between security and seat 12A, someone decided we didn't belong. Now the room was quiet. My daughter asked me why that woman didn't like us, and I had to answer her without breaking her hope. I told her people sometimes forget to see with their hearts. He looked down for a moment. "I don't need to rehash what happened. You've seen the video, you've read the coverage. But what matters now is what we build from it." He leaned forward slightly. "Don't call this a story, call it a standard." He raised a hand and counted with his fingers. 1. Every gate agent should be trained to recognize bias not just by textbook, but through lived voices. 2. Every airline should have a code of dignity, enforceable, visible, and real. 3. And every child, black, brown, or otherwise, should be able to fly without wondering if their family will be stopped before the sky even begins. Murmurs of agreement. He stepped back, then turned to gesture toward the front row. My daughter now knows the power of a calm voice, of a phone call that doesn't threaten but transforms. That's what Charles Barrett did. He didn't yell. He didn't protect me because I'm family. He showed up because leadership means showing up for everyone. He paused one final time. And for anyone watching, whether you're in a suit, a uniform, or a pair of sneakers at Gate 42, I hope you'll remember this. The flight only stops when we do nothing, but the future takes off when we see each other. Silence. Then applause. Real, standing. Lauren wiped a tear. Charles stood and clapped. And Nia Brasiburum, she held her turtle up high as if it had flown the entire speech with her father. After the event, dozens came up to shake Darius's hand. Some quietly thanked him. Some admitted they were rethinking how they spoke to passengers, students, customers, even their own children. But it was Carla Jennings, the flight attendant, who waited the longest. She approached carefully, still in uniform, her hands clasped. Mr. Mitchell, she said, I didn't know you, but I knew people like her, and I didn't say anything. Darius studied her. And now I want to help fix it, she said. From the inside, with my name on it, no more silence. He reached out and shook her hand. That's how we win. Later that night, the family sat in their DC hotel room. Nia, already in pajamas, looked up and said, Daddy, did we fix it? Darius smiled softly. Not yet, baby. Lauren added gently, but we helped open the door. Nia nodded thoughtfully. Then we just need to keep going through. She picked up a pen and her crayon picture and began writing something new underneath. Lauren peeked over and read it aloud. Let us all fly fair, from anywhere. The speech had ended. The applause had faded. The stage was cleared. But outside the conference hall, something far more powerful was happening. A line had formed, quiet, patient, respectful, not to take selfies, not to grab headlines, but to say something real. One by one, people approached Darius Mitchell. A man in a wheelchair rolled up his service dog beside him. I was denied entry onto a flight last year because they said my chair couldn't fit the aisle, he said, voice trembling. They didn't even try. Watching you made me feel like maybe someone finally heard us. A Latina mother stepped forward next. I have 3 boys, she said, showing a photo on her phone. I cried during your speech. We live in a world where our kids get profiled for being loud or wearing hoodies. But your daughter gets to see her father speak power to power and win. That gives me hope. Even a pilot, a white man in his 50s with gray temples, stood before Darius and said simply, I didn't know how deep it went, but I do now, and I won't unsee it. It was humbling, overwhelming, healing. That evening, back in their hotel room, Darius finally had a moment to breathe. Lauren sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through dozens of articles and tags on social media. One headline from the Washington Post read, When calm becomes courage, the Mitchell family and the movement they didn't ask for. Another from NPR read, Beyond Gate 42, redefining dignity in the skies. Nia was sitting on the floor, markers spread across the carpet, doodling a new drawing, her dad on a stage with a giant heart behind him. She handed it up proudly. Can we hang this in your office, Daddy? He smiled. Absolutely. A knock at the door broke the moment. It wasn't press. It wasn't organizers. It was Charles Barrett. Still in suit pants, but no jacket this time. Sleeves rolled up. The weight of leadership hanging visibly on his shoulders. Darius opened the door and smiled. You don't rest, do you? Charles stepped in, offering a quiet laugh. Not when the work just started. Lauren offered him tea. Nia handed him a drawing. Charles studied it with the care of someone reviewing a blueprint. You've changed the company more in 3 days than our board did in 3 years, he said, sitting beside them. We're renaming our internal training program after your daughter. Darius blinked. You're kidding. I never kid about legacy, Charles said. It'll be called the NIA Initiative Navigating Inclusion Authentically. Lauren gasped. That's incredible. Charles turned to Nia and said, You're helping us build something that might protect millions of kids just like you. Nia giggled. Do I get a badge? Charles laughed. I'll make sure of it. The next day, the Mitchells returned home to Atlanta. Their neighborhood welcomed them like heroes. Neighbors dropped off flowers. Local schools asked if Darius would consider speaking to parents. The community center offered to host screenings of the Gate 42 speech for youth groups. One moment at an airport had become a blueprint for every hallway, bus stop, classroom, and waiting room that ever doubted who belonged. But Darius didn't let it go to his head. He still did the dishes. Still helped Nia with homework. still walked her to school with her turtle backpack bouncing at her side. It was Nia, however, who said something days later that stopped him in his tracks. As they passed by a mural downtown, one now painted with her face beside a plane, and a son, she asked Daddy, "Is this what history feels like?" He paused, knelt beside her, and said, "It's what happens when people decide not to look away." 3 weeks later, Darius Mitchell found himself once again standing at an airport gate. But this time it wasn't about confrontation. It was invitation. Sky Vista had asked him to speak at the unveiling of a new gate at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport Gate 42, now renamed the Nia Mitchell Honor Gate. It would be the first gate in the country dedicated to a child, not because she was famous, but because she reminded the world that every child deserves to be seen. As the glass doors slid open and the crowd gathered, Nia stood beside her father wearing a little blazer and a badge that read, "Honor Guest." She looked up at him and whispered, "Is it okay if I say something too?" Darius knelt down. "You don't need permission to be heard." The two of them walked up to the microphone together. Darius began, "3 weeks ago, we were denied entry at this very gate. Today, we welcome the world through it." He stepped aside, and Nia, holding a crayon-colored card, read slowly but clearly, "This is for every kid who got told to wait, for every grown-up who wasn't seen. From now on, this gate is for everyone, even turtles." The crowd laughed softly. "Please fly kind, and please fly fair. We all belong up there." There wasn't a dry eye in the terminal. At home later that week, life had mostly returned to normal. Mostly. Nia still went to school. Darius still worked his tech job. Lauren resumed her nonprofit work on education equity. But the world kept rippling. A startup reached out to partner with Darius on building bias detection tools for customer service platforms. Lauren was invited to advise a new bill focused on fairness training for federal transportation workers. And Charles Barrett, he launched the NIA initiative not just at Sky Vista, but invited competitors to participate too. "This isn't a brand move," he said in a televised interview. "This is a humanity move." But the moment that struck Darius most didn't come with headlines, stages, or applause. It came one quiet Saturday at the park. He sat on a bench sipping coffee, watching Nia feed ducks near the pond. A woman walked by and paused. She was in her 60s with silver hair and eyes full of emotion. "You're him, aren't you?" she asked. Darius nodded modestly. "I suppose I am." She sat beside him. "My grandson is 6. He's been afraid of flying since his dad got detained at LAX last year. But last week, he saw your daughter speak on the news." Darius turned curious. He said, "Grandma, if that little girl's dad fixed the airplane, maybe we can go see Daddy again." The woman's eyes filled. "You didn't just change an airline. You changed my family's future." Darius stared ahead, heart full. Not with pride, but with peace. Because sometimes when you stand firm at one gate, you help open 1,000 more. "You don't understand, ma'am. That little girl saved my life." The security guard's voice cracked as he pointed to a photo taped inside his locker. It was a picture of Nia Mitchell holding her turtle standing beneath the new plaque at Gate 42. Outside the Sky Vista employee lounge, the airport buzzed with travelers, late flights, and rolling luggage. But in this small room, tucked behind Terminal B, stories were changing. Because something strange had begun happening ever since the Gate 42 video went viral. People, regular and visible, everyday people, started speaking up. 3 months had passed since Darius gave his speech in D.C., since Nia's crayon words became corporate policy, since a nation watched a quiet black father make the world stop without shouting. In that time, the ripple had become a movement. Teachers used the story in classrooms. Churches showed the speech during Sunday sermons. Even police departments asked to license the NIA initiative training for public interaction. And now, Darius was on a plane again. But this time it wasn't a family vacation. It was something more personal, more unexpected. He had been invited to Albuquerque, New Mexico by a small community charter airline called Horizon Sky. They had reached out with a strange, heartfelt email. "We're not a big airline. We don't have much budget. But our staff watched the Gate 42 video every morning for a week. We cried. We changed. Now we want to show you what came of it." Darius almost declined. He wasn't chasing fame. He'd said all he needed to say. But then he saw the postscript. "We renamed our service counter the welcome desk. And our kids did something for your daughter." He showed Lauren. She smiled softly. "Let's go." They landed in Albuquerque on a bright spring morning. No banners, no cameras. Just a quiet group of staff waiting with signs made of cardboard and love. One said, "Welcome to Gate 43, where kindness boards first." Another, written in crayon, read, "Hinaya, we made room for your friends." Lauren held Nia's hand. Darius stood still, overwhelmed. A woman in a Horizon Sky vest approached. Her name tag read, Mel. She was in her 40s, Native American, and her eyes glistened. "I was there when a teen got denied a seat because she had anxiety," Mel said. "I didn't speak up. I'll never forget it." She pointed behind her. A wall had been painted, a mural. Nia's face smiling. Planes in the background. Diverse kids holding hands across a tarmac. At the top in bold, "Let us all fly fair, from anywhere." Lauren gasped. Nia dropped her turtle in awe. Darius just blinked and whispered, "I thought we'd only changed one gate." Mel shook her head. "You changed the destination." It wasn't the mural that made Lauren cry. It was what came after. Once the crowd at Gate 43 had settled and a few photos were taken, Mel from Horizon Sky led the Mitchells through a hallway that hadn't yet opened to the public. "Where are we going?" Nia asked, still cradling her turtle plush. Mel smiled but didn't answer. They stopped in front of a glass door labeled Flight Lab 42, Youth Inclusion Project. Inside was a room that looked more like a colorful classroom than anything airport-related: beanbags, touchscreens, digital maps, storyboards on the walls, and a timeline of social justice and aviation history. But at the center was what made Darius go completely still. A full-size flight simulator scaled down for kids. With a custom seat, painted purple, and stenciled carefully on the back, Captain Nia. Nia's mouth fell open. "That's for me," Mel laughed. "It's for every kid who didn't think they belonged in the cockpit." Lauren placed a hand over her mouth, overcome. Darius knelt down beside Nia. "You see this baby? They didn't just put your face on the wall. They're building seats for you to fly." Inside the lab, the Mitchells were greeted by a group of children from a local middle school. They had been part of Horizon Sky's New Voices from the Gate project, a storytelling and empathy initiative for youth. Each child had written a personal response to the Gate 42 video and sent them to Sky Vista, unaware that the real Nia would ever read them. Mel handed over a stack of 8 envelopes, each marked in bright marker for Nia. She sat on the simulator step and opened the first one. "Dear Nia, my name is Ismail. I wear glasses and people make fun of me, but I saw your face and I think you are brave. I want to be a helper like you. From Ismail, age 9. The second letter, meine Norne, zur Wessenanter. I'm Zoe, I'm 10. I cried when the lady said your family couldn't go on the plane. I told my mom I want to be the opposite of her when I grow up. Thank you for being strong." By the time she reached the third, Lauren was wiping her eyes. Again. Darius stood back and watched it all. The room, the impact, the echoes. He remembered how small he had felt standing at Gate 42, how helpless. But now, his daughter was a centerpiece of transformation. Mel tapped him gently on the arm. "Can I show you something personal?" She led him to the back wall where a digital screen was mounted above a single quote printed on a strip of silver metal. "Dignity isn't a premium service. It's a human right." Darius Mitchell. The quote pulsed gently on the screen behind an interactive map showing airports around the world, now implementing anti-bias protocols, each site lighting up with a small glowing dot. Mel explained, "We partnered with a global pilot group. Every time a gate is restructured with bias training, we light up the network. We've had 18 in the last 60 days. Darius whispered, "You lit up the world." "No," Mel replied. "You did. We just saw it." Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, Charles Barrett stood alone in his private office at Sky Vista headquarters. He watched a live stream from Gate 43 in silence, seeing the mural, hearing the laughter, watching Nia's tiny figure crawl into the purple pilot seat. He wasn't smiling. He was crying. Because what he had once feared was true. It had taken one act of injustice and one man's decision to call him, to make him remember why he joined this industry in the first place. Not to lead airlines, but to give people wings. He picked up his phone and dialed his legal department. "Cancel the trademark request for the NER initiative," he said. The voice on the other end paused. "Sir, make it public domain," Charles said. "If it's going to change the world, it shouldn't belong to one airline. It should belong to everyone." Later that night, as the sun fell behind the Sandia Mountains, the Mitchell family walked through the streets of Albuquerque, ice cream in hand, laughter trailing behind them. They passed a bookstore, and inside the window was a simple sign handwritten in chalk. "Fly kind, fly fair, fly Nia." Darius stopped and stared. Lauren leaned into him. "Still think this is just about a gate?" He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "This is about who we let into the sky and who we teach to soar." Nia couldn't stop smiling. She'd spent over an hour in the kid-sized simulator pretending to take off land and wave at imaginary passengers. Each time she turned the yoke, she shouted something new. Seatbelts on. We're going to the Turtles Gate 43 is clear for kindness. The staff at Horizon Sky beamed every time. Mel even said, if we don't get a recruitment pipeline from this girl, the industry has failed. Lauren watched from the doorway with pride on her face and peace in her chest. Darius leaned beside her, arms crossed quiet. You okay? She asked. He nodded slowly. I just didn't think something so painful could create something this beautiful. She looked up at him. That's what resilience does. It grows things in the cracks. Darius stepped into the room and knelt beside Nia. Ready to go, Captain. Nia pouted. Just one more flight. He laughed. You've already flown to Joy and landed at Legacy. Let's give another kid a turn. Nia reluctantly stood and hugged the purple chair before walking out, still gripping her turtle like a co-pilot. They didn't expect what waited outside the door. A group of Horizon Sky flight attendants, maybe 20 of them, stood in formation. Each held a small placard. One by one, they read them aloud. I used to ignore it. Now I speak. I thought fairness was HR's job. Now it's mine. Because of you, I told my brother I was sorry. You helped me see the people I walked past. And the last, I didn't know a 6-year-old could lead me. But she did. Nia looked up at her parents. Are we in a movie? Darius picked her up. We're in something better. Mel stepped forward and handed Nia a small pair of pilot wings, real ones, not plastic. These belong to our first black female captain. She said to give them to the girl who reminded us why she ever flew in the first place. Lauren whispered, This is history. Mel shook her head, smiling. No, this is correction, and it's just beginning. Back at the hotel, the family ordered room service grilled cheese, tomato soup, and strawberry milkshakes. Comfort food after a deeply emotional day. Lauren turned on the TV and a local station was broadcasting a live segment from the airport showing the mural and quoting Nia's speech from earlier. Let us all fly fair. From anywhere, the anchor repeated. A line from a 6-year-old who may have just changed the face of air travel in this country. Nia tilted her head. They keep saying I changed everything, but all I did was ask a question. Lauren nodded. That's where change starts, sweetheart. With one brave question. Darius looked down at his phone. Dozens of missed messages. One stood out. From J. Turner Gov, subject request to join advisory committee. Mr. Mitchell, we are establishing a national board on passenger equity, transparency, and dignity. Would you consider a leadership role? We want the voices of real families, not just experts. You and your daughter have shifted the narrative. Now help us shift the system. Darius stared at the message. He hadn't sought any of this. But maybe, just maybe, the sky had been waiting for a voice like Nia's to open. And maybe his job was to amplify it. That night, as they packed to return to Atlanta, Nia placed the pilot wings in her backpack tucked right next to her turtle. She looked up at her mom. Will they still remember me when I grow up? Lauren paused, then knelt beside her. They will, because they're not remembering you, they're remembering what you reminded them of. Nia thought for a moment. That flying is for everyone. Lauren kissed her forehead. Exactly. Darius stood by the hotel window that night, arms folded, staring out at the desert horizon. Albuquerque's city lights shimmered beneath a dark velvet sky. Behind him, Nia was asleep on the bed, still wearing her denim jacket and golden pilot wings. Her arms were wrapped tightly around the turtle plush. Her breathing was slow, steady, peaceful. Lauren walked over and wrapped her arms around Darius's waist from behind. You're quiet. He nodded. I'm thinking about the day she'll look back on all this and not remember half of it. Lauren rested her cheek against his back, but she'll remember how it felt. He turned to face her. It's not just her. I'm starting to realize something. What does Serena want to know? This was never just about getting on that plane. It's not even just about race or policy. It's about what happens when someone stops being invisible, when someone takes up the space they were told they didn't deserve. Lauren looked over at Nia. She's not invisible anymore. No, he agreed, but I wonder how many other kids still are. The next morning, a surprise arrived at their hotel lobby. It wasn't from the airline. It was a young woman named Avery, college-age, biracial, quiet but composed. She held a worn backpack in a small brown envelope. She had come to meet them after driving 4 hours from Santa Fe. Sorry, she said nervously. I didn't know how else to get this to you. Darius invited her to sit. I was on a flight last year, she began, when a guy in business class yelled at a flight attendant because she gave me his seat by mistake. He didn't care that it was a system error. He just kept saying, you people always try to sneak up front. She looked down. No one said anything. Not the other passengers, not the flight crew. I got moved. I cried in the bathroom for 2 hours. Then I swore I'd never fly again. She handed Darius the envelope. But then I saw your video and your daughter, and I saw the way the world stopped, not because someone fought back, but because someone stood still and made it undeniable. Inside the envelope was a boarding pass, her new one, for her first flight since the incident. I leave tomorrow, she said, and I'm not afraid anymore. Lauren reached across the table and held Avery's hand. You're not just flying, you're reclaiming airspace. That same day, news broke that Sky Vista had opened applications for a new executive position, Vice President of Passenger Equity and Accessibility, a position that had never existed. Charles Barrett had submitted it himself. The press speculated who would fill it: DEI consultants, policy experts, retired executives. But internally, the application had already been offered quietly to Darius Mitchell. No fanfare, no pressure. Just a note from Charles. You showed us where the gaps are. Now come help us bridge them. I trust your instincts more than any resume. Darius read the email twice. He didn't say yes, not yet, because he knew leadership wasn't about climbing higher. It was about lifting others. Later that evening, while Nia watched cartoons and Lauren answered messages from their nonprofit board, Darius sat at a small desk and opened a blank document on his laptop. He titled it The Next Gate, and he began writing. We told the world to see us, but now we must teach them to build with us. Visibility is the beginning, equity is the structure, and love is the runway. 2 days later, Darius, Lauren, and Nia boarded a flight back to Atlanta. It was quiet, uneventful, no cameras, no crowds, just a flight. But in row 14C sat a man named Marcus Lane, a mechanic from Detroit traveling to visit his sister who had just had surgery. He was 52, wore a simple blue windbreaker, and preferred aisle seats because of an old knee injury. He didn't recognize Darius or his family when they boarded. But something about the little girl in the yellow dress with the pilot wings pinned on her denim jacket and a turtle plush clutched under one arm, it stirred something. As they passed, Nia smiled at him. Hi, she said. I like your watch. He chuckled. Thank you, ma'am. Darius gave a polite nod. Lauren smiled gently. Marcus kept watching. And then he realized he had seen them before. In a video his niece had forwarded to him with the caption, "This is how you change the world without shouting." They were those Mitchells, the ones from Gate 42. Marcus didn't say anything right away. But as the flight progressed, he found himself replaying the entire moment in his mind, how Elaine had blocked their way, how Darius had stepped back, how the call changed everything, and how the world didn't fall apart. It finally paused and listened. When the seatbelt sign turned off after takeoff, Marcus flagged the flight attendant and quietly asked for an extra napkin. He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket and began writing slowly. Not fancy, not poetic, just true. I saw what you did and how you did it. I've been angry for years about how people look at us. You reminded me that we don't always have to yell to be heard. Sometimes stillness shouts louder. I'm trying to do better. Thank you. 14C. As the plane began to descend into Atlanta, Marcus folded the napkin into a small square and waited until the plane had parked at the gate. Then as Darius stood to grab their luggage, Marcus tapped him lightly on the shoulder. Mr. Mitchell. Darius turned a bit surprised. Marcus handed him the folded napkin. I didn't want to get off this plane without saying thank you. Then he stepped out into the aisle and disappeared down the jet bridge. Darius slowly opened the napkin, read the note. He smiled, but not the kind of smile that comes from praise. It was the smile of recognition, of knowing that ripples were still moving far from the viral video, far from the conferences and murals. It was the kind of smile that comes when a stranger sees you, not just your face, but your integrity, and decides to become better because of it. That evening, Darius sat at the kitchen table, the napkin next to his laptop glowing under a pendant light. He added a new page to his draft proposal for Sky Vista's Passenger Equity Board. It won't always be loud, he wrote. Sometimes equity travels on napkins, not press releases. On the other side of the country, in a small town near Denver, Elaine Foster sat alone on a park bench watching children play. It had been almost 6 months since she was removed from her post at Gate 42. 6 months since her face was caught in a video she never thought anyone would care about. 6 months since her name trended, not for what she did, but for what she revealed. She had lost her job, her pension, her pride, and for a while her purpose. She avoided news outlets, skipped town halls, ignored messages. But one day curiosity got the better of her. She searched for Mitchell family Sky Vista, and the videos flooded in. Nia on the stage, Darius reading messages from children, people quoting her own words not to honor them but to expose them. She watched the clip over and over, watched herself say, "You people always cause trouble," watched herself roll her eyes, fold her arms, dismiss a father and his daughter. And then she cried. Not because she got caught, because she finally saw what everyone else saw, that her silence, her posture, her tone had been practiced cruelty. She didn't feel like a villain, but that didn't matter. She had become one in someone else's story. And now the world was rewriting that story without her. Weeks later, Elaine made her first public move since being removed. She walked into a community center downtown and asked to speak to whoever ran the youth empathy program. The woman behind the desk, young, cautious, polite, recognized her instantly. But she didn't flinch. She said, "Come back next Wednesday. We're talking about air travel discrimination." Elaine returned with a notebook and sat in the back of the room. She listened to kids, to parents, to people of color who spoke calmly and clearly about being watched, questioned, denied, ignored. At the end of the session, the moderator asked if anyone had a personal story to share. Elaine stood. Her hands shook. Her voice quivered. "I was the woman at gate 42, she said. Gasp, then silence. "I can't take back what I said. I can't erase the looks on their faces. But I need to say this out loud. I was wrong. Not just in that moment, but in all the small moments that trained me to believe some passengers were problems before they even spoke." She paused. "I came here to start over. Not to defend, but to dismantle the version of myself that could look at a 6-year-old girl and see disruption instead of wonder." No applause, just quiet. And that quiet felt honest. That same week, Darius received a small envelope in the mail at his Atlanta home. No return address. Inside was a note handwritten in slanted cursive. "Sibirikida worry and Mr. Mitchell. I once denied your daughter a seat, but you, without yelling, without hate, granted me something far greater. A mirror. I've spent my whole life at gates, but never realized how many I was keeping closed. This is my apology and my thanks. E.F." Darius sat in his office, eyes resting on the last two initials. He said nothing. He didn't need to, because this was never about punishment. It was always about opening doors from the inside out. Atlanta was warm when they landed. The sky open and blue, almost symbolic, like it was waiting. Darius stepped off the plane first, holding Nia's hand. Lauren followed behind a backpack slung over one shoulder, tired but fulfilled. The past few months had been a whirlwind: media appearances, conference panels, school visits, community letters, and flight after flight after flight. But this time it felt different. There was no crowd waiting, no journalists, just life, just home. Outside the terminal, the three of them paused. Nia looked up and asked, "Can we still do turtles this weekend?" Darius laughed. "I think we've earned it." Lauren leaned over and whispered, "Or maybe we all need a little water and quiet." They walked toward the parking lot. No camera flash, no applause. Just the sound of wheels on concrete and a little girl humming her made-up airline jingle. But 20 minutes later, as they pulled into their neighborhood, something unexpected came into view. A group of children, about a dozen, stood near the Mitchell's driveway. Each of them wore a small badge made of laminated paper. At the top of every badge, "Sky Leader trained to see people." A neighbor stepped forward, a teacher Darius knew from down the street. "We've been running a Saturday program with the kids," she said, holding up a notebook full of crayon drawings and handwritten pages. They wrote their own gate stories. Not because they were stopped, but because they learned what to do when they see someone else who is. Nia's eyes lit up. "Like passengers with power." The teacher smiled. "Exactly." Darius knelt beside one boy who couldn't have been more than 8. "What did you write about?" The boy showed his drawing: 2 people at a bus stop. One was crying. The other had a speech bubble that read, "You're not alone." Darius nodded. That's exactly how this started. That night after dinner and a late walk under the stars, Darius sat at his desk and opened the email from Charles Barrett that had been sitting in his inbox for 2 days. Subject: your decision. Darius, we're prepared to announce the new VP of Equity next week. If it's not you, it'll be someone qualified. But if it's you, it'll be someone who's already done the job before the title ever existed. Either way, I trust you. Warmly, Charles. Darius stared at the screen, then at the window, then at a photo on his desk taken the day of the speech in D.C. Nia holding the mic, smiling, her small gold pilot wings reflecting the overhead lights. He replied, "Turdusharian. Twitter Charles Wanasbanton. Thank you. My answer is simple. I accept the position on one condition. I won't be flying solo. I want 3 youth advisors seated on every quarterly board. I want flight attendants like Carla in leadership training. And I want the first gate we redesign to be in the neighborhood I grew up in. This job wasn't made for me, but maybe I was made for it. Let's fly. Hmm. Darius. 2 months later, Gate 01 at the Sky Vista Regional Hub in Birmingham, Alabama reopened. It didn't have a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It had a circle of chairs, where passengers, staff, community leaders, and youth sat together and talked for the first time ever about what it meant to board fairly. There was no stage, only seats. And in each one, someone who had once been overlooked. Back home on a quiet Sunday, Nia taped a new drawing above her bed. It showed a sky filled with gates floating like clouds. Each one had different colors, different shapes, and different words written on top. Welcome, you belong, we see you. And at the center, one giant gate with wide open doors and a tiny plane lifting off into the horizon. She called it the sky we're still building.